The 10th leading cause of death in the United States of America is suicide. And about 60% of those suicides come from some kind of stress, right? And about 60 to 70% of that stress comes from work stress. And so the American Institute of Stress has divided stress into, or work stress into a pie chart. And 46% of it comes from workload, and 28% and the rest comes from some kind of interpersonal conflict. So basically, man's journey as a worker has always been about balancing personal life and work life. Now, before we get into the brief history of stress, let's talk about work. So human beings have always worked, and they've always been workers. Early man has worked to survive. When he was a hunter-gatherer, he used to work to effectively track down an animal for food supply and to use it as means of survival, essentially. And he had to then manufacture tools to effectively hunt. So it was still work, even though it was different. It was still work that directly pertained to survival. And then he became a farmer. So when agriculture revolution happened, and during the Neolithic, he had to learn the skills of, say, crop patterns or the weather, or making land fertile, and all these kind of things. Really, they were still work. Very close to our reality today, because we also acquire our skill sets, our educational eligibilities, qualifications in order to find our domains in the world. The only difference is that this early man didn't have any kind of material thing as an exchange, which we have today, which is salary or income or something, in return of our service or in return of the product that we're trying to provide. Now, fast forward about 3,000 years or so, and during the start of the Bronze Age or something, they were trying to enhance their other skills, their skills of craftsmanship or pottery or carpentry. Or man was a blacksmith or a goldsmith, and they were manufacturing jewelries or artifacts which were in demand. And so these small businesses or these small manufacturing shops were started around this time, and this was actually around the same time that the first salary may have been paid, but we don't know that yet. So, and this was the same time that man had learned to become a self-owner of his own business. So he had his own shop. It was just one artisan or a worker, and then he used to provide for the village or small groups of villages. And then this product was in demand, and so what happened effectively was that any kind of economic trouble, any kind of problem directly affected the one who was working, or any kind of problem for the worker, which was health or some personal issue, that would affect the business. So very different, but no workforce. And then fast forward a few years. By the way, around this time, the Roman Empire had salt rations, and then in Mesopotamia and few other places there were beer rations for the soldiers that were working for these empires. So these empires and these civilizations were very advanced by the time they reached 1000 BC or 100 BC, which is the time that I want to talk about now, because around this time, as populations increased, the products that people were providing, the things that artisans were making, had even more demand. And so what happened was that the need to make this stuff forced man to look out for help. And this was around the same time that workforce was started. So an artisan or a shop owner, a carpenter, a potter, most likely would have two people helping him out in order to get more work done in less time. So this was around the same time that workforce and employee-employer sort of thing was established. Now, if you move a bit ahead and further into the history of humankind, say around the Middle Ages to post-Renaissance, you find that populations increased vastly, and after the bubonic plague, livelihood became more pleasant, mortality rates increased. Most wars were over by the time the 1800s or the late 1700s came along. All your Anglo-French wars had been done with. The American Revolutionary War was done with. The French Revolutionary War was in its dawn. And basically, you couldn't just become a soldier, and the importance of having work, having some kind of fixed income increased. And so around 1790 or so in America, factories started popping up because somebody had to cater to the increasing population, and the demand was quite a lot. It was not just enough for one person or an artisan working in a workshop providing for people. It had to be vast. And as the demand increased, efficiency was the utter need of the time. And to manufacture goods in quicker time was also another necessity in order to survive for everybody and everywhere, really. And so what happened was these factories, these textile mills, started employing workers or people. Mines started popping up. And as mines started popping up, whatever was the coin usage or coinage before that now had increased because the supply of things like silver and copper and other alloys was even more during this time as mines opened up, basically. And so what happened was essentially during this sort of colonial era, this industrial revolution, this kind of more people started looking at work as a very feasible thing to do, something that was part of life. And so as more people wanted work, execution needed to happen. Because as that happened, there was a structure that was required around work. To get a product made, or to get a job done, or to have a business flourishing, there had to be a structure. And when there's structure, there's function. And so hierarchical organizations were formed during this time. Managers and people under managers, and then one owner, and all these kind of layered, multi hierarchical organizations developed in all domains. And so think about it. Think about what happened. Man started as, working for himself, mainly going and hunting and gathering, and then that was his survival. Then he started working to have some kind of income to keep going, to buy basic food supply or something during post Neolithic age and during the Bronze Age. And now man had to work for something in order to have a material income, in order to live a lifestyle, in order to survive. So this has sort of created a distance between man and what the work was for. And so what happened around this time was that these workers were not really working for the greater good of the company, or they were not really working for the product. They were just one part of this basic component kind of thing, isolated component, along with other isolated components that would come together to form a product. And along with these theories of communism and socialism, Kropotkin and Marx and all this kind of stuff, you had another sort of brand of theories, of philosophies that in labor economics is being called wage slavery. And so basically the work life of wage workers or laborers was being compared to chattel slaves during the colonial times or during the times of slavery. And David Graeber has drawn comparison between, say, the first contracts being drawn for wage workers were basically along the same lines as what was being created for chattel slaves. So in hindsight, these slaves were, in return for their service, being paid with comfort, with shelter, and with food. Well, not comfort all the time, but yes, food and shelter. And then these wage workers were being paid money which they can use to acquire shelter and food and to mobilize. Now, Chomsky has spoken about this, and there are several criticisms with this comparison, meaning that, say, a wage worker is still free to choose whatever he wants to work, and he's still free to he can scale up in the work itself. He can mobilize economically and socially as a result of getting better, which slaves could not do, at least before the abolishment of slavery. And so with this came the need to look at man and workplace through the psychological lens, and to look at the idea that can we personalize occupation choices. And so around this time, the Myers-Briggs personality test was developed in 1917 or 18, and it classified human beings or individuals into personality traits, and then sort of laid the ground for assigning ideal occupations or educational choices for people. Because again, population was increasing, and there was a need for people to work more and more. Innovations were happening, scientific innovations were taking place, new workplaces, new domains and fields were popping up. So obviously opportunities were endless, but there was a need to personalize this. Now we still use this model today, and we have a personalized form of education which allows us in the knowledge mobility structure to move up using our qualifications and eligibility to achieve better career prospects or career successes. And it has largely become of personality and everything. But the problem is, around this time also, and after 2 world wars and 1 Cold War and multiple crises, we're using the same pattern, but economies have shifted, and various issues with the market and the various sectors in business they've changed. Political patterns have changed, cultures have evolved, innovations have gone into a completely different direction. So is stress really something that is universal and something that has always laid its ground beneath all of these changes taking place on the surface? Or is it something that has also evolved with time, and our standards of just how we feel about things has come to fail us? Let's talk about stress in the next video.